Hello, so this is a video all about A-level history essay writing. It's the first of a series of videos I'm going to do focusing on the different parts of history A-level essays, and this one, as you can see, is focused on introductions and effective introductions for A-level history essays. So the regular history essays, not source questions, not interpretations questions, just regular essays. So the plan for this video is I'm going to talk about the purpose of introductions, then I'm going to talk about the three things really that an introduction should do, so context, definition, argument, and then I'm going to show an exemplar from somebody who did get an A star in A-level history. So in terms of the purpose of introductions, you've got to provide context, define key terms, and an argument for your essay. So just to say, and I have been an examiner, marked A-level history essays for an exam board. If you don't have time to do an introduction, it's really not the end of the world. I would argue that a conclusion is actually more important because mark schemes talk about reaching an overall judgment, and that's what you do in the conclusion. So if you've only got, half an hour instead of 45 minutes and you need to cut something, you could potentially cut an introduction, but obviously try and do one if you can, because they really do set up your essay well and it kind of offers signposting for the examiner. So you need to provide context, define key terms, and an argument. So don't kind of leave the examiner hanging. Don't think, oh, I'll just leave it on a kind of cliff edge. Give your argument in the intro. And I've seen other videos of people talking about leaving your argument for the end. Don't do that. Put it straight in there. So here's an example question. How far was the influence of Southern whites in the Democratic Party the chief cause of the failure to address the grievances of Black Americans during the New Deal years? So context of the years. We're defining the key terms there are failure to address the grievances of Black Americans. So you'd have to set out what that means. So social, political, economic inequality, for example. And then you're arguing against that, the point that's raised, or agreeing with that. Was it the influence of Southern whites in the Democrat Party, or was it something else? So that's the purpose of introductions. So let's talk about context. So in terms of context, what that means is showing the examiner that you understand the scope of the question. Okay, you understand what was going on in this time frame. So here's a question. How far do you agree that the first Great Migration, circa 1910 to 1930, can be regarded as the most significant change in the pattern of black settlement in the USA in the period 1850 to 2009? So this is a past question on the civil rights paper. And for context, very, very briefly, first sentence of the intro, what was going on in 1850? So you'd say the majority of Black Americans at this point were enslaved in the southern states. By 2009, you've got the election of Obama, the inauguration of Obama. And then in between that period, the sentence of summary of the changes, you've got Black Americans gaining rights and moving around the country, because the question is about migration. So something like that. So what was going on at the start, what was going on at the end, and a brief summary of what was going on kind of in between. That's all you need to do for context. Context, to be honest, if I'm being really honest, is probably the least important part of your intro, okay? But it is a really nice way to show the examiner, yeah, I understand the scope of the question. And it means that you have that coverage, straight away. You're talking about the start and the end. So you're showing the examiner, yeah, I understand what's going on here. I'm understanding the question. I'm reading the question in detail. Okay, the next thing you need to do in the intro, after you've done your context, is your definition. So you're defining key terms, and this then becomes your criteria for judgment. So let's have a look at a question to make it easier to understand. So here's a question. How far do you agree that the third representation of the People Act of 1884 to 85 was the key turning point in the development of democracy in England in the years from 1790 to 1928? So the key terms, the thing that you're really assessing here is the extent to which the third representation of the People Act was a key turning point. So turning point is the key term that you're going to need to define. So let's say we define it, as I've done here, as something that causes widespread, long-term, and unprecedented change. So if you've gone for that, in your paragraphs you talk about the third representation of the People Act, you might talk about the 1832 Reform Act, for example, other pieces of legislation, you would say, are they turning points? Are they things that cause widespread, long-term and unprecedented change? So by defining that key term, it helps your analysis. Okay, and then the next thing you need to do, the third and final thing you need to do in your intro, is give your argument, and give your argument with a basis. So don't say, overall it was this, and leave it at that. So let's look at an example. How far can the actions of Oliver Cromwell be blamed for the failure of the Republic, 1649-60? So your argument could be something like this. The actions of Cromwell are not the most significant cause for the failure of the Republic. The most significant cause was military involvement in politics, which consistently undermined attempts at political settlement throughout the period. So you're not just saying it wasn't Cromwell, it was the military. You're saying it was the military because, and giving that basis. And then that's something that you can come back to again and again in your essay, so you have a consistent line of argument, which you need to do to reach the top level. So finally, here is an exemplar introduction. So I'm just going to read through this and talk through it briefly, and then just show you why it's so effective. So the question is, how far did the British economy radically change in the period 1625 to 88? And this is the intro, and this is from somebody who, as I said before, scored an A star overall in their history A level. Between the years 1625 to 88, the British economy was undoubtedly altered. The period saw agricultural change, the development of national markets, and overseas expansion. However, for these changes to be considered radical, they must have been unprecedented, long-term, transformative, and widespread. As a result of this, the extent to which the economy changed radically is somewhat limited. Whilst overseas trade was certainly an enormous change that made a global impact, other factors such as changes within agriculture and banking were simply continuations of ideas that had been established before the given period. So before I break this down, when you're looking at that, look at the language that's used, and we can see it's really, really good analytical language. But this is what I want to show you just to finish the video, that it follows the structure of context, definition, argument. And if you look at the argument, it's got a very clear basis. It's saying the other factors, such as agriculture and banking, were simply continuations of ideas. So it's got a very, very clear definition of what we mean by radical. It's got a really nice context line there as well. So I hope that's useful. Any questions at all or comments, please leave a comment below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you for listening.